Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Barry Muller, filling in for Gideon Thomas on this week's RevAmp podcast. I wanted to introduce our listeners to our guest, Martin Fleming, Chief Revenue Scientist at Varicent. He does many things, other things besides for that, and has a pretty interesting background, but I'll let Martin take it from here to give us a little bit more information about his background.
So thanks, Barry. It's great to be with you today. That is correct. I do have the role of Chief Revenue Scientist with Varicent. And really what I am asked to do is to help bring together the transformation that we see in the sales process. Varicent, as you know, is focused on sales performance management. And really the intersection of that transformation with data science and increase analytic capabilities that we now have, particularly because the sales process and sellers generate so much data on their own. It's a very rich and fruitful space to help improve the productivity of sellers, help sellers improve their income, help sales leaders be more successful, and help business leaders achieve their financial objectives. So my role is really at the intersection of data science and business process transformation.
Amazing. So I love that, trying to help others be more successful through data and AI. That's really cool. And then before this podcast, before we start recording this podcast, you're telling me a bit about some of your other experiences.
So I spend a significant portion of my time with Varicent, but also spend a great deal of time working as a research fellow with the Productivity Institute, a consortium of 8 universities in the UK, all of whose names folks would recognize: Cambridge, Oxford, King's College, London School of Business, London School of Economics, etc. Funded by the government over 5 years, looking at the issue of productivity, which is a kind of a nebulous concept to most folks, but really where we're focused is trying to understand, not only for the UK, but for the developed world generally, what the requirements are to be able to realize more rapid growth, more equal distribution of income, and really a more successful and responsive economic system than we've seen over the past couple of decades. Not surprisingly, you're gonna find out that the work that I do generally in data science, technology, economics all comes together on both sides of my life here. So we'll certainly be very interested to talk further about that work. It really builds on the 20 years that I spent at IBM, the last 10 of which I was IBM's chief economist and chief analytics officer. And it's become, in the US certainly, the practice to integrate or bring together data science and economics. A number of years ago, 4 or 5, could be 6 years ago now, there were 20 or 30 of us who began meeting in the Silicon Valley area, and we now have a meeting scheduled in 2 weeks in Seattle. There'll be 400 attendees. So this space of bringing together economics and data science in the technology industry, now beginning to spread to other industries as well, has been a rapidly growing space. So that's where I spend my life.
Right, that's awesome, and it's really cool that it gets to encapsulate the things that you enjoy doing.
Yes, exactly.
That's awesome. And then, so you mentioned that there was 3 things that the research you guys are doing is: 1, productivity. So I think that's interesting because you could do many different things to bring out growth. You could do many different things to have a successful, growing economy, but you're focusing on productivity, correct? Why is it specifically productivity? What does that mean to us in the context of all business, or of all, even anything, not outside of business in addition to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Economists use the term productivity almost reflexively, and have an intuitive understanding. To those not in the profession, the term sometimes means work harder, work faster, and the sort of Charlie Chaplin on the assembly line image. And that's really not what we mean when we use the term productivity. What we're really talking about is the effort that we make as individuals and as organizations to create new and greater sources of value. Value that perhaps hasn't existed in the past, or perhaps can be improved in the future. Let me give you one or two examples that should hopefully will be a good illustration. Much of what we do in our economic lives these days is not in the manufacturing sector. It's not on the assembly line, but we provide services to each other. And many of us will pay quite handsomely to have good quality, high level service. A number of years ago, a simple illustration is, we have financial services that are provided via what at the time were thought of as stockbrokers in individual trades. Increasingly over time, we've seen organizations like Charles Schwab and others create really holistic service capabilities to be able to provide investors, individual investors, with a portfolio of capabilities to be able to grow their income and their wealth without having to be an expert on every stock that's issued on every stock exchange. That has over time evolved into organizations like Vanguard and Fidelity, where that value is now being created by providing a broader range of services. So that's a measure of productivity in the financial services market, where there's new sources of value that's being created, that's generating benefit of income and wealth to the individual investor that wasn't available years ago. Another great example that I always think about is, what we've seen evolve in recent years in the airline industry. We have new airline models with, for example, in the US, Southwest Air, where a completely different model of serving travelers, making travel available where it otherwise wasn't. And so that's another source of value that didn't exist. So it's around innovation, creativity, new value, and all of that gets measured in what economists refer to as productivity, the value that gets created generally per hour of effort per worker. And there's a expression that economists use, Paul Krugman made famous, productivity in the long run isn't everything, but it's almost everything. And that's the source of income and wealth.
Okay, cool. I love that. And thanks for elaborating on that. So just to even break it down one step further. So with the finance example, economists have now, I want to focus on the word measured, the effect of all these efforts of Charles Schwab, of Vanguard, with bringing their index funds, and then maybe even Robinhood, which recently IPO'd, yes, and now brings a whole different type of user where people can just be in their bed and start investing easily,
sure,
without even realizing it. So that's super interesting. And then I guess in the beginning, you even reflected on that. It's reflected also with technology, which I guess could be hinted about with Robinhood, but even technology and sales productivity. Maybe you could give me, and we talked about the fourth industrial revolution. Maybe you could give us a little bit more information on where some of your research does with technology and sales productivity.
Sure. So certainly sales productivity is one of many business processes that's really in the very early stages of adopting many of the capabilities that are now becoming available. Over the course of 20 or 30 years, computing has become ubiquitous and cheap. And now with the advent of cloud model, cloud infrastructure available just about everywhere. So both computing and storage really make have created this software as a service industry to be able to provide software for almost any business process. So this is the outcome of a long period of innovation and investment, much as we've seen historically. There are some historic parallels which are quite useful in understanding the potential. And because we're talking about the future, I say the potential, the probability of seeing some greater success as we go forward. If you go back to the beginning of the industrial era, we've seen a period where initially steam and water power converted economic activity from what was very much of a manual process to a bit more of a manufactured process. Workers at some point learned that they weren't beholden to a boss, if you will, but they could find new jobs and change jobs and increase their salary and wages by having their skill competed for in the open market. As the developed world went through the period after the Second World War, what we think of as the manufacturing sector, the assembly line driven by fossil fuels, became the driver of growth, and workers and management and government worked together to provide a new framework for workers and labor. And then by the 1970s, we began to see electronic technology appear and evolve. And now we're going through a similar transformation that was where the 2008-2009 financial crisis was a very important turning point, where I think we're now going to find that the 2020-2021 pandemic is going to add to the pressure of transformation. But if we see some of the economics play out as we have in the past, there's a reasonable probability that we're going to see some very deep and fundamental transformation in how not only how work gets done, but in the nature of economics as we go forward, much as we've seen in 3 occasions over the past 200 years.
Yeah, so thanks, Martin, for sharing that. I wanted to ask, have we seen with the recent pandemic, or our current pandemic, excuse me, that innovation has been even spurred quicker than past catastrophes, whether it be the 2008 financial crisis or a different type of crisis?
Well, you're right. There's been there are a lot of financial crises in history, but there have been 3 or 4 that we consider global financial crises. There have also been a number of pandemics. Both the financial crises and the pandemics have been associated with very significant transformation in activity. Not surprisingly, in terms of financial crises, because balance sheets get cleansed, all of the bad assets disappear, and then so that investors are positioned to take on better and more meaningful investments. Pandemics, interestingly enough, I think, as we all probably have realized, create a certain psychology. There's a virus that's unseen, there's a disease that's feared, and that causes workers and businesses and governments to react as we've seen. And workers question their careers, question how they're working, and that drives further change. However, my observation is that the changes that we've seen thus far are really only, I would say, maybe only the beginning, or not perhaps even the beginning. The increased use and utilization of e-commerce really is just a continuation of what we've seen over many years already. Now, it's been utilized at a much greater pace, much greater rate, but it's changes that were in train for years. Likewise, working from home, the other big trend, didn't start 18 or 20 months ago. It increased in intensity. But those are just two changes in economic activity and business process, where we're very likely to see many, many more come along as a result, as both businesses and workers behave in a fundamentally different fashion as we go forward.
Yeah, no, that totally makes a lot of sense. Maybe you could, many of our listeners are revenue operation professionals or sales leaders. Maybe you can give a concrete example of recent research, either from the pandemic or even from beforehand, that might be interesting to them.
Yeah, no, we see the sales profession changing and changing rapidly, and it's a great example of a business process that's going through significant transformation. Many of the processes that sales leaders have to oversee and lead, for example, how sales territories are created, how quotas are assigned, are now in a position where all of the manual effort that in the past has gone into that is quickly being replaced in an automated fashion. And it's not automation for the sake of automation. It's automation that results in more efficient and effective sales territories, and in greater efficiency by the sellers. So it's an opportunity for sellers, for sales leaders, for business leaders generally to benefit financially. And these are spaces where in the past there has been relatively little innovation, and now we're in a position where we can introduce some significant changes and really improve the lives, so to speak, of sales leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to understand, is that innovation being spurred from the pandemic? Is that innovation being spurred by startups' resources now not being able to work on bigger projects, so they have to focus on more niche projects, so now they can focus on sales because mobile is 10 years over, or it's since it started really going big?
Yeah, so I would say all of the above. Mm-hmm. Certainly with what the central banks of the world have done of providing an enormous amount of capital. I mean, we've seen what's happened to the balance sheets of central banks. Enormous amount of capital has been added. All of that capital now is flowing through the financial markets. It's certainly available from venture firms, from private equity firms in various different forms. So, mm-hmm. So certainly the inexpensive availability of capital is a contributing factor. You're right that the advent of mobile devices over the past 15 or so years, I guess we're almost getting close to 20 years, right. of the invention of the iPhone, that in some respect changed everything, is making the use of these tools at the user level much more readily available. And you know, I don't necessarily think of sales performance management as a niche space as much as one of many business processes that are now going through some of these changes that the technology is made available, that the availability of capital is made available, and certainly to some extent, you could say certainly the pressures created by the pandemic have spurred at a faster pace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then I guess, if you will, that the pandemic has also changed the need for some of like territory planning, because people weren't flying to places. So then things needed to be reallocated or.
Absolutely, no question about it. the ability to understand relationships that sellers have with clients, the existing relationships that we want to be able to maintain, while at the same time being able to bring in new opportunities into a sales territory that in the past, you're right, may have required expensive travel. Now is available that hadn't been the case in the past. So that creates a better match, an opportunity to better match the skills of the seller with the need of the client, and allows for the expense to be managed in a little bit more effective way. So that trade-off between skill and location has become more effective, and the trade-off between managing existing client relationships but balancing territories at the same time has become a little bit more manageable with the tools that are being created. So across both of those dimensions is a place where sales leaders now find that they have a greater ability to deliver productivity and efficiency for their sales organization.
Yeah, makes sense. So if I'm a sales leader, I think a lot of what we just spoke about is the trends, the macro, if you will. If I'm a sales leader, what from your research can I take to maybe make myself a better salesperson? Yes, I can use technology to make myself more efficient. Is there something else that I can also gain from some of your research?
Well, I guess the other space is around what we think of as revenue intelligence, the ability to assess opportunities, wins or losses, what the probabilities are, the ability to forecast sales, and the ability to assess the performance of sellers. All of that has been done by sales leaders historically. Every sales leader in the world is assessing their opportunities, but they're doing it based on their own experience and their own intuition, which in our research we have found is not wrong, but it often is a little bit too narrow, so that the opportunities that sales leaders assess as being likely to close, maybe a 60% chance of closing, a 75% chance of closing, actually has a 90 or a 95% chance of closing. And likewise, the opportunities that they feel like, well, I'm not so confident about this, may not close, is really a 10% chance or a 0% chance. And why do those probabilities matter? They matter because when you're trying to estimate or you're trying to forecast revenue, you have to assign the correct probability to get to the right revenue forecast. So that's where the more sophisticated modeling helps, not only to provide a better view of the opportunity, the outcome of the opportunities, but to provide a better forecast as well.
For sure. Let's take that even one step deeper. I'm like thinking, like my prior experiences, like sometimes I make opinions based on the data that came from my experience, but like I'm not in sales, but I do some business development here and there at past companies, and even winning internal marketing conversations for the company. But my personality also might be different than my salesperson personality or the person under me. So that could also bring some biases. Has there been any research around that specifically?
Yeah, we as humans, we all want to reduce things to rules of thumb, based on lessons learned. And that's helpful. But the rules of thumb change. Markets change, competitors change, products change. And so we have to be continuously updating those rules of thumb. And that's really what the machine learning and artificial intelligence modeling does for us. It helps us to stay current in terms of those percentages or those ratios that we're applying based on our prior experience. It gets even worse when these rules of thumb get baked into organizational behavior. We always allocate so much revenue to this, or always allocate so much revenue to that, or we always expect some certain outcome. And in some organizations, you can have the same practice going on for 10, 15, 20 years, while there's massive changes over that time in a marketplace. So the machine learning and artificial intelligence really is a way of continuously updating the empirical estimates that are being produced by the data, and therefore giving you a better view of the opportunity.
Cool. And then when you reference machine learning AI, is that going as deep learning? Or is
Well,
it even a higher step up?
yeah. So strictly speaking, deep learning will go beyond just available numeric data to vision, to text in particular, and typically requires vast quantities of data because you're solving these neural network models at many different layers. Now, most of these business applications are not yet at the point to be able to use deep learning. However, we are beginning to see some. For example, imagine for medical devices, you're inspecting a medical device, which becomes very important if you're going to insert it into a person, to a human, right? And so oftentimes you have a large number of quite skilled workers who are part of the inspection process. While with the vision technology that we have available now and the artificial intelligence models, there's a great deal of prediction that the deep learning model can do of finding a potentially defective device that then there's only a smaller subset of the product, the actual products that have to be inspected by humans. So there are beginning to be those applications, but again, going back to our fourth industrial revolution discussion, we're in the early days where, we're talking about a 20, 30, 40-year period where all of this capability becomes available. And as workers, we see our skills being transformed into other job roles.
Right. Oh, that makes sense. Cool. No, thanks for explaining a bit more about deep learning.
Yeah.
So I guess here, maybe I'll ask you a question or two about your time at IBM, and then we'll wrap it up. I'd love to know two things, and you can, in any particular order. One, what was the most surprising thing about either research findings from there or even your experience there as since you were there for so long? And then on another thing is, what thing consistently stayed the same? You were there for 20 years. What on day one was the same as on well, 365 times 20 day?
Yeah, I think IBM has a strong culture around I want to say learning, the intellectual content and capability. Certainly the research organization has for decades certainly been very productive and highly regarded. And that continues to be the case. So the culture of learning, insight, and being able to produce new insights and new approaches is one that has been maintained consistently and continues to be quite valuable, intangible asset for IBM. I think one of the, I guess I would say I have a couple of interesting experiences to share. One would be around living in a large organization such as IBM, and it's the case in others. Over time, one learns how to manage almost anything effectively because the management system that's required is relatively complex. But you get a great deal of experience being able to provide management and more than management, I would say leadership across a broad set of capabilities and a broad set of teams. And I probably hadn't thought a lot about that prior to joining IBM. I guess secondly, a topic you and I have touched on a bit is around diversity. The workforce is very diverse, and you learn that it's the I was going to use the word diverse. It's the broad set of points of view that we all bring from, whether it's different geographies, different races, different religions, different ethnic groups, and that's what adds to the innovation and creativity. We're not all bringing a similar perspective, we're bringing different perspectives, and those differences as they come from our life experience is what allows innovation to be so effective and so productive And it probably ties into your original point. What's part of the intellectual and product success of IBM is tied really to the diverse population of us all bringing many different points of view.
Cool, love that. So my final question that I ask all my guests, what's your favorite book and why?
Oh, well, my new favorite book is holding up my my Mac here. My colleague Diane Coyle from Cambridge just has a book called Cogs and Monsters, where she spends all of her effort critiquing the economics profession. So she's done a terrific piece of work. And I've just begun going through it, but it's become my new favorite book.
Love that. All right. Well, thanks again, Martin, and thanks to our listeners. See you guys next week. And Martin, looking forward to staying in touch.
Thanks. Good.
Bye.